During the mid-19th century, Marie Duplessis was the talk of Paris. Famed for her wit and beauty, she had relationships with many wealthy and notable men at the time, but just a few years prior, she was living on a farm in poor circumstances. So what changed, and why was her life tragic, despite this rise in French society? Join me to find out. The woman who would later become known as Marie Duplessis was actually born as Alphonsine Rose Plessis on the 15th of January 1824 in the village of Nonant-le-Pin in Normandy in northern France. Alphonsine was not born into wealth, far from it. Her background was one of extreme poverty and difficulty. Her father, Marie Plessis, was the illegitimate son of a prostitute and a priest. He was a man who had been brutalized by his life experiences and had developed a sinister bent himself. He was abusive to Alphonsine's mother Marie, and she eventually abandoned her family to seek out work as a maid elsewhere and to leave the abusive life she was living in. It is believed that she had intended to eventually send for her daughters to join her at some time in the future, but the plan never materialized, as Marie died when Alphonsine was just 6 years old. Alphonsine's childhood did not get any better. She was separated from her older sister shortly after their mother's death, when she was sent to live with an uncle. At this time, Alphonsine was sent to live on the farm of one of her mother's cousins. According to several of her biographies, Alphonsine was abused here by some of the farm workers, with this beginning from about the age of 11. Eventually, Alphonsine was rescued from this dire situation when she was sent back to her father, who had her apprenticed as a laundress, an occupation which involved tough physical work with a little financial reward, but which did lead her being removed from the torturous scenario on the farm. However, even this reprieve did not last for long, as Alphonsine's father abandoned her early in her teenage years and appears to have sold her to an elderly bachelor in Paris. She was now effectively on her own, but she showed her resourcefulness even at her young age by escaping from the aging bachelor and acquiring work as a maid in the French capital. For a time afterwards, she was apprenticed to a dressmaker, but it was in her late teens that she would begin to work as a courtesan, the profession which would result in acquiring a sort of literary fame in the mid-19th century. One day in 1839, Alphonsine Plessis, who by now was 15 years of age, was standing on a street in Paris, gazing longingly at a food stall which was selling dishes of fried potatoes. As she was there, one Louis Nestor Roqueplan, a well-regarded writer, journalist and theatre director in Paris at the time, passed by and spotted her. Understanding that the look on her face was born of hunger and deprivation, he approached the young woman and offered to buy her some food. Alphonsine thanked him and devoured the dish when presented to her. It was a chance meeting, but one which changed Alphonsine's life. Over the next several months, Alphonsine developed a relationship with Roqueplan, which saw her being introduced to many literary and artistic figures in Paris, and above all, men with money. By now, she was evidently emerging as an attractive young woman, and into the early 1840s, she entered into a string of relationships with wealthy individuals whom she met in Paris. The first of these was to Monsieur Nullet, an affluent restaurant owner in the city. Within a few weeks of meeting her, Nullet had rented an apartment for her in the city, on the Rue de l'Arcade, and gave her 3,000 francs to meet her material needs. It was the beginning of her new life as a courtesan, effectively a prostitute for wealthier clients. Soon, Alphonsine realized that there were wealthier clients out there than Monsieur Nullet, and she began to look elsewhere. It was also around this time that she adopted the name she is more well known by, Marie Duplessis. Marie was her mother's name, while Duplessis was a slightly altered version of her actual surname, Plessis. Alphonsine simply added a du to it, as it added an aristocratic slant to the surname. She also began to develop interests associated with the aristocracy. For instance, one of her lovers, a wealthy young man by the name of Agénor du Guiche, arranged for her to receive dance and piano lessons, and she also began to learn to read and write. Duplessis became the toast of many French parties in the French capital during the 1840s, famed for her wit and beauty. But to those who knew her well, there was also a contradictory sadness to her at times, a product, no doubt, of her traumatic childhood. Her awareness of how grim an existence a person could have could be seen in her charitable donations to foundations which helped abused women and abandoned girls in Paris, a situation which she had escaped not too long ago. Noullet and de Guiche were far from Duplessis' only lovers. Others included Edouard de Périgord, the romantic novelist Roger de Beauvoir, Count Gustav von Stackelberg, an elderly aristocrat from central Germany, and the Hungarian composer and pianist Franz Liszt. Liszt was probably the individual with whom Marie was associated, who she held the most affection towards, and if there was true love in her short life, it was most likely felt for him. However, Marie's love life is certainly most remembered today for her affair with Alexandre Dumas Jr., the son of Alexandre Dumas Sr., the acclaimed author of novels such as The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo. The son also had literary ambitions, one which he would realize to some extent in later life, though he always lived in his father's shadow. In 1844, he was still a young man of 20 years of age when he first met Marie, who was the same age as he. They entered into a relationship within weeks, but Dumas, who was infatuated by Marie, was tormented by her ongoing relationships with several other men throughout the mid-1840s. Consequently, he attempted to distance himself from her in 1846, though she made it clear that she wished to continue their relationship, even if it would never be monogamous on her part. Marie eloped to London briefly in 1846, where she married one of her lovers, the French aristocrat Edouard de Périgord. However, she was also increasingly ill, even though she was only 22 years of age at the time. Marie was suffering from tuberculosis, a devastating wasting disease which had begun to become more and more virulent in the cramped urban squalor of industrial age Europe. What was worse, little was known about how tuberculosis was transmitted, how it impacted on its victims, or how to stop its ravages in the 19th century. Thus, within just a few short months of her marriage, Marie died in Paris on the 3rd of February 1847, aged just 23. Her husband and another one of her lovers, Count Gustav von Stackelberg, were at her bedside when she passed. Her funeral at Montmartre Cemetery in the north of Paris a few days later was attended by hundreds of people, many of them from Paris's artistic and literary world, a statement of how high she had managed to rise as a courtesan in the French capital in just a few short years. Marie was immortalized shortly after her death by Dumas in his most acclaimed work, entitled La Dame aux Camélias, the Lady of the Camélias, sometimes known simply as Camille. The novel was a thinly disguised biographical account of Marie's life, with the main character, Marguerite Gautier, effectively being Marie, and the main male character in the book, Armand Duval, being Dumas in all but name. The novel was remarkable at the time for its sympathetic portrait of a courtesan, and how her life was shaped in many ways by the circumstances of her early life and times, something which readers were unused to. It went on to become a bestseller in France during the second half of the 19th century. Dumas followed up the book in 1852 with a stage version of La Dame aux Camélias. It was banned at first by the Parisian stage censors, who were unwilling to accept its depiction of both prostitution and the wasting disease that was tuberculosis on stage. However, in light of Dumas' father's reputation, they soon came around and allowed the play to be performed. Yet, it was not so fortunate elsewhere, and the play was banned in London for many years to come. Dumas' work was not the only one which retold elements of Duplessis' story in the mid-19th century. Just a few years later, the famed Italian composer Giuseppe Verdi composed one of his most acclaimed operas, La Traviata, which told Marie's story. Verdi's opera was based on Dumas' play, as he had been visiting Paris early in 1852 when the play version of La Dame aux Camélias debuted on the stage of the French capital. Verdi was struck by the story and immediately began composing music for what would become an opera derived from Dumas' telling of Marie's story. The result, which was finalized in 1853, was La Traviata, which translates approximately as The Fallen Woman. It was first performed at La Fenice Opera House in Venice on the 6th of March 1853. The main character was called Violetta, but she was clearly based on Marie Duplessis, and her story ends exactly as Marie's life did, with her time as a prostitute and then her death from tuberculosis. Curiously enough, despite La Dame aux Camélias still being censored in Britain, La Traviata was performed in London within months of its premiere in northern Italy. The justification for this was that, while an English audience might be able to understand Duplessis' story when related in the French Dumas had used, it was believed that Verdi's opera would be unintelligible to an English audience where few spoke or understood Italian. La Traviata was noteworthy at the time for featuring the first character to die in an opera from tuberculosis. Also, its subject matter resonated with people, and Marie's story quickly became one of the most popular operas of the 19th century. It has remained one of Verdi's most acclaimed works in the century and a half since, and is still widely performed today. Thus, while many people are unaware of the fact, many people have seen the story of Marie Duplessis played out before them at the opera. Marie Duplessis is still fairly well remembered today, in large part owing to her associations with some of the most prominent literary and cultural figures of the mid-19th century. Several biographies of her have been published, while in her native Normandy, one can visit a museum dedicated specifically to her memory, the La Dame aux Camélias Museum, so named after Dumas' work. The role of Marguerite in La Dame aux Camélias or Camille became one of the most prized roles in the golden age of theatre in the late 19th century, and Marguerite's story has been retold in thousands of performances, from the stages of Paris to Broadway in New York down to the present day. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Marie Duplessis. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you have any other suggestions, also leave them in the comments. If you want to check out any of the things I use for my videos, be sure to click the links in the description, and I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.